The cafeteria roared with the chaos of 100 voices, trays clattering, and laughter sharp enough to cut. Elliot Reed stood behind the serving line, his hands steady as he scooped mashed potatoes onto a plate, but his heart thumped like a war drum. Today, he felt the weight of eyes on him, the whispers that slithered through the crowd like snakes. He was 17, lanky, with hazel eyes that held too much for a kid his age. His mom, Maria, the head cook, hustled in the back, her apron stained with years of hard work. They weren't rich, far from it, but they had each other, and that had always been enough. Until now. Caleb Warrington, the golden boy of Lincoln High, leaned against the counter, his designer jacket screaming money. His blue eyes glinted with something cruel, and his smirk was a blade. "Hey, cook's kid," he drawled, loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Heard you're into guys. That why you're hiding back there, playing house with mommy?" The air sucked out of the room. Heads turned. A few kids snickered. Others froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Elliot's grip tightened on the serving spoon, his knuckles white. He'd known this day would come. He'd come out to a few close friends last year, and somehow, the rumor had spread like wildfire through the manicured lawns of this suburban Chicago school. But hearing it weaponized by Caleb, the untouchable rich kid whose dad owned half the town, hit differently. "Keep moving, Caleb," Elliot said, his voice low but steady. "Your trust fund's not going to make the line go faster." A ripple of gasps and stifled laughs broke the tension. Caleb's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you're tough? Huh? Let's see how tough you are when everyone knows what a freak you are." Elliot's chest burned. Freak. The word wasn't new, but it still stung, sharp and precise, like a needle under his skin. He wanted to fire back, to tell Caleb exactly where he could shove his trust fund, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he met Caleb's gaze, unblinking, and slid the plate across the counter. "Enjoy your lunch," he said, each word deliberate. Caleb snorted, grabbing the plate and sauntering off to his table, where his posse of polished jocks waited, already laughing. Elliot exhaled, his hands shaking now that no one was watching. He glanced at his mom, who was too busy stirring a pot of chili to notice the exchange. Good. She didn't need to know. Not yet. The rest of lunch passed in a blur. Elliot kept his head down, serving food, ignoring the occasional stare or whisper. But Caleb's words lingered, a dark cloud over his thoughts. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, spent too many sleepless nights coming to terms with that, but he wasn't naive. This was Lincoln High, where money talked and difference was a target. Caleb's family practically owned the school board, and Elliot, he was just the cook's kid. After the bell rang and the cafeteria emptied, Elliot slipped into the back to help clean up. His mom, Maria, wiped her hands on her apron and gave him a warm smile. "You okay, Mijo? You look like you're carrying the world today." "I'm fine, Ma," he lied, forcing a grin. She didn't push, but her eyes lingered, like she could see the cracks he was trying to hide. Maria had raised him alone since his dad left when he was 5. She worked double shifts, never complained, and always made time to listen. But this was something he wasn't ready to burden her with. As he scrubbed pots, his mind churned. Caleb wasn't done, he never was. Guys like him didn't let things go. And Elliot knew the whispers would only get louder, the taunts sharper. But what Caleb didn't know was that Elliot wasn't just the cook's kid. He was a fighter, even if he didn't know it yet. That night, at their small apartment, Elliot sat at the kitchen table, his sketchbook open. He'd always drawn nothing fancy, just pencil sketches of faces, places, dreams he couldn't say out loud. Tonight, his pencil moved furiously, sketching a figure that looked a lot like Caleb, but with a shadow looming over him. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was something else, something bigger. The next day, Elliot walked into school with his head high, even as the whispers followed him down the hall. Caleb was there, leaning against a locker, his grin as sharp as ever. "Ready for round 2. Cook's kid," he called out, his voice carrying over the crowd. Elliot didn't answer. Not yet. But as he walked past, his hand brushed the folded piece of paper in his pocket, a flyer for the school's talent show. He'd never performed in front of anyone before, but something had shifted inside him. Caleb thought he could break him. Elliot was about to prove him wrong. The talent show flyer was crumpled from Elliot's nervous grip, but he smoothed it out on his desk during study hall. Lincoln High's annual showcase was a big deal. Kids performed everything from off-key pop covers to magic tricks that barely worked. Elliot had never considered signing up before. He wasn't a performer, not like Caleb, who'd probably waltz on stage with some polished act funded by his dad's money. But the idea of standing in front of the whole school, of taking back the narrative Caleb had twisted, lit a fire in Elliot's chest. He scribbled his name on the sign-up sheet after school, his heart pounding. "Spoken word poetry," he wrote, though he wasn't sure what that even meant yet. He just knew he had words, too many of them, bottled up for too long. If Caleb wanted to make him a spectacle, fine. He'd do it on his own terms. Back home, Elliot sat cross-legged on his bed, a notebook in his lap. He wrote late into the night, the words spilling out raw and jagged. He wrote about the weight of whispers, the sting of freak, the way his mom's smile kept him grounded. He wrote about love, not the kind in movies, but the kind he felt in quiet moments, dreaming of a boy he hadn't met yet. It was messy, unpolished, but it was him. The next morning, Caleb was waiting for him outside the cafeteria. "Heard you're signing up for the talent show," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's it gonna be? Cook's kid? A cooking demo? Or you gonna cry about your feelings?" His friends laughed, a chorus of cruelty. Elliot's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "You'll see," he said, brushing past. Caleb's laughter followed him, but it didn't sting as much today. He had a plan now, a spark of defiance that felt like power. In the cafeteria, Maria noticed the change in her son. "You're up to something," she said, stirring a pot of soup. "That look in your eyes, it's the same one I had when I told your dad I was leaving." Elliot chuckled, but it was strained. "Just trying something new, Ma." He didn't tell her about Caleb or the talent show. She had enough to worry about: bills, long shifts, the landlord who kept raising rent. But her words stuck with him. She'd fought her own battles, and she'd won. Maybe he could, too. Over the next week, Elliot's life split into two: school, where he dodged Caleb's taunts and the stares that followed, and home, where he poured his heart into his poem. He practiced in front of his mirror, his voice shaky at first, then stronger. He imagined the auditorium, the lights, the sea of faces. He imagined Caleb's smirk fading. But doubt crept in. What if he froze? What if they laughed? Worse, what if they didn't care? He pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the words. They were his truth, and that was enough. Then came the first surprise. During lunch, a girl named Mia approached him. She was quiet, artsy, with dyed purple hair and a nose ring. "I heard what Caleb said," she whispered, glancing around. "And I saw your name on the talent show list. You're brave, Elliot. If you need help with your act, I'm good with lighting and stuff." Elliot blinked, caught off guard. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft. I could use that. Mia's offer felt like a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone was against him. They spent the next few days planning her tweaking the stage setup, him refining his poem. She didn't ask for details, just nodded when he said it was personal. The night before the talent show, Elliot couldn't sleep. He sat on the fire escape, the city lights of Chicago flickering in the distance. His poem was done, memorized, but it felt like a piece of his soul was about to be laid bare. He thought of Caleb, of the cafeteria, of every time he'd felt small. Then he thought of his mom, of Mia's quiet support, of the boy he hoped to love one day. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for anyone who'd ever been called a freak, who'd ever felt like they didn't belong. The thought steadied him, like a hand on his shoulder. At school the next day, the air buzzed with excitement. The talent show was tonight, and the hallways were alive with chatter. Caleb, predictably, didn't let up. "Hope you're ready to bomb. Cook's kid," he sneered as they passed in the hall. "Wouldn't want to embarrass your mom." Elliot stopped, turning to face him. For the first time, he didn't look away. "I'm not the one who's going to be embarrassed tonight," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Caleb's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Elliot walked away. The bell rang, and the day blurred into a haze of nerves and anticipation. Tonight, everything would change. The auditorium was a sea of noise as students poured in, their chatter echoing off the high ceilings. Elliot stood backstage, his palms sweaty, the folded poem in his pocket feeling heavier than ever. The stage lights glowed, casting long shadows, and Mia gave him a thumbs up from the lighting booth. "You got this," she mouthed. He wasn't so sure. The crowd was bigger than he'd expected, hundreds of kids, teachers, even some parents. His mom was out there, somewhere, thinking he was just helping with setup. He hadn't told her he was performing. He didn't want her to worry or to see him fail. The show began with a flurry of acts, a shaky violin solo, a dance routine that got cheers, Caleb's predictably slick guitar performance that had girls screaming. He strutted off stage, winking at Elliot as he passed. "Good luck following that. Cook's kid." Elliot's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to breathe. He was next. The MC, a peppy senior named Tara, called his name. Elliot read, with a spoken word poem. The crowd clapped politely, but he could feel the undercurrent of curiosity. Whispers rippled through the auditorium, "That's the Cook's kid." The gay one. He stepped onto the stage, the spotlight blinding. His heart hammered so loud he was sure the mic would pick it up. He adjusted the microphone, his hands trembling. The room fell silent, waiting. He glanced at the crowd, spotting Caleb's smirk in the front row, his posse snickering. Then he saw his mom, near the back, her face a mix of surprise and pride. That was enough. "My name is Elliot," he began, his voice cracking but growing stronger. "And I'm not who you think I am." The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. He spoke of growing up without a dad, of his mom's calloused hands, of the word freak cutting deeper than any knife. He spoke of love not as a choice, but as a truth, one he'd fought to embrace. His voice rose and fell, steady then shaking, each line a piece of his heart laid bare. The crowd was silent, but it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of being seen, of words hitting home. He saw Mia's grin from the booth, saw teachers leaning forward, saw kids who'd never spoken to him nodding, their eyes wide. And then he reached the final lines, the ones he'd rewritten a dozen times. "You can call me a freak. You can laugh. You can stare. But I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." The auditorium erupted. Applause thundered, whistles piercing the air. Elliot stood frozen, his chest heaving, as the sound washed over him. He looked at Caleb, whose smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable. Backstage, Mia tackled him with a hug. "That was incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You made them feel it." Elliot could only nod, his throat tight. He'd done it. He'd stood up, spoken his truth, and the world hadn't ended. But it wasn't over. As he left the stage, Caleb was waiting in the wings, his arms crossed. "Nice stunt," he said, his voice low. "But don't think this changes anything." Elliot met his gaze, unflinching. "It already has," he said, brushing past. For the first time, he felt taller than Caleb, even if only in his own heart. That night, Maria pulled him into a hug outside the auditorium. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "You were so brave, Mijo." "I didn't want you to worry," he admitted, hugging her back. "I'm always gonna worry," she said, laughing through her tears. "But I'm so proud." As they walked home under the streetlights, Elliot felt lighter, like he'd shed a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. But he also knew Caleb wasn't done. Guys like him didn't back down easily. And sure enough, the next day at school, the whispers were different. Not cruel, but curious. Kids he'd never talked to stopped him in the hall, saying things like, "That was dope, man," or "I didn't know you could do that." Caleb, though, was quieter. He didn't taunt Elliot in the cafeteria, didn't call out to him in the halls. It was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. Elliot didn't trust it. He was right not to. The days after the talent show were a strange mix of triumph and tension. Elliot walked through Lincoln High with a new kind of confidence, buoyed by the applause that still echoed in his mind. Kids who'd ignored him before now nodded in the halls, and a few even asked about his poem. But Caleb's silence was louder than any taunt. He watched Elliot from a distance, his eyes cold, calculating. Elliot tried to focus on the good. Mia became a constant presence, helping him navigate the newfound attention. She introduced him to her friends, a tight-knit group of artsy misfits who welcomed him without question. For the first time, Elliot felt like he belonged somewhere outside his mom's kitchen. But Caleb wasn't idle. A week after the talent show, a rumor started circling. It was subtle at first, whispered in locker rooms and group chats. Elliot's poem was a lie. He's just playing the victim for attention. The words twisted like a knife in Elliot's gut. He knew who was behind it. In the cafeteria, Caleb finally made his move. He sauntered up to the serving line, his smirk back in full force. "Nice act, cook's kid," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "But we all know you're just milking the gay thing for pity points." The room didn't go silent this time, but the air shifted, heavy with anticipation. Elliot's hands froze on the ladle. He could feel every eye on him, waiting for his response. "I don't need your pity," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm not the one starting rumors to feel better about myself." Caleb's eyes flashed, but he didn't back down. "Keep telling yourself that. Nobody's buying your sob story." Before Elliot could respond, Maria appeared behind him, her apron still on, her face a storm of protective fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You don't get to talk to my son like that." Caleb laughed, but it was hollow. "Stay out of this, lunch lady." The words hit like a slap. Elliot saw the hurt flicker across his mom's face, and something snapped inside him. "Don't you dare talk to her like that," he said, stepping forward. "You don't know what it's like to work for something." All you do is tear people down. The cafeteria went quiet now, the tension thick enough to choke on. Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, he looked small, caught off guard by Elliot's fire. Maria put a hand on Elliot's shoulder. "Let's go, Mijo," she said softly. "He's not worth it." But as they walked away, Elliot knew this wasn't the end. Caleb's pride was wounded, and that made him dangerous. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, sketching again, this time a scene from the cafeteria, his mom's fierce eyes, Caleb's faltering smirk. The pencil moved faster, angrier. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for her, for every kid who'd ever been made to feel less. The next day, Mia pulled him aside before school. "Caleb's planning something," she said, her voice low. "I overheard him in the art room. He's got some kind of stunt planned for the spring assembly. Something to put you in your place." Elliot's stomach dropped. The spring assembly was a school-wide event, bigger than the talent show, with parents, alumni, even local news sometimes. Whatever Caleb was planning, it would be public, and it would be brutal. "What do I do?" Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "You fight back. Not with fists. Nobody's saying that. But with what you're good at. Your words. Your art. Beat him at his own game." The idea took root, slow but steady. Elliot spent the next week planning, his sketchbook filling with ideas. He wasn't sure what Caleb had in store, but he wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. As the assembly drew closer, the tension at school grew unbearable. Caleb's rumors spread, but so did support for Elliot. Kids he didn't even know started sharing his poem online, calling it real and powerful. It gave him strength, but it also made him a bigger target. The night before the assembly, Elliot sat with his mom at the kitchen table. "I know you're fighting something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "And I know you're trying to protect me. But you don't have to do it alone." Elliot swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. "I just want you to be proud of me," he said. "Oh, Mijo," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I've always been proud of you." The spring assembly was held in the school's gymnasium, transformed with banners and lights into a makeshift theater. The bleachers were packed with students, parents, and faculty, the air buzzing with anticipation. Elliot stood backstage, his sketchbook clutched to his chest, his heart racing. He'd spent weeks preparing, but now, with the crowd's roar filtering through the curtains, doubt gnawed at him. Mia was there, adjusting the projector they'd borrowed from the art department. "You ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "As I'll ever be," Elliot said, forcing a smile. His plan was risky, maybe too risky, but it was all he had. He'd turned his sketches into a slideshow, paired with a new spoken-word piece. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever felt invisible. The assembly began with speeches from the principal, then a few student council awards. Caleb was up there, accepting a plaque for community leadership, his smile polished and perfect. The crowd clapped, but Elliot saw the falseness in it, the way Caleb's eyes scanned the room for approval. Then it was Elliot's turn. The principal introduced him as a student with a special presentation, and the gym went quiet. He stepped onto the stage, the spotlight harsh, his sketchbook trembling in his hands. The projector hummed behind him, casting the first image, a pencil sketch of a kid standing alone, head bowed, shadows circling. "This is for anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong," Elliot began, his voice echoing through the gym. The words came easier this time, fueled by weeks of anger and hope. He spoke of pain, of resilience, of love in all its forms. The slides changed sketches of his mom working late, of kids whispering in the halls, of a heart cracked but still beating. The crowd was silent, but it was a different silence now. It was heavy, reverent. He saw his mom in the bleachers, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming. He saw Mia in the booth, nodding fiercely. And he saw Caleb, his face unreadable, his hands clenched. Then came the moment he'd been dreading. Halfway through his piece, Caleb stood up in the front row, his voice cutting through the quiet. "This is pathetic," he shouted. "You're just begging for attention again." The gym gasped, a collective intake of breath. Elliot froze, his words caught in his throat. The principal started to stand, but Elliot raised a hand, signaling he wasn't done. "You're right, Caleb," he said, his voice steady despite the shaking in his chest. "I am asking for attention. Not for everyone you've ever hurt. For every kid you've called a freak. Every person you've made feel small. This is for them." The projector flicked to a new slide, a sketch of Caleb. His smirk exaggerated, but his eyes hollow, lost. The crowd murmured, some shocked, others nodding. Caleb's face went red, his fists tight. Elliot kept going, his voice rising. "You think you can silence us, but you can't. Because we're louder than your hate. We're stronger than your fear." The gym erupted in applause, louder than at the talent show, louder than anything Elliot had ever heard. Kids stood, cheering, some crying. Teachers clapped, even the principal. Caleb sank back into his seat, his face pale, his posse silent for once. Backstage, Mia was waiting, her eyes shining. "You did it," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You shut him up." But Elliot didn't feel triumphant. He felt raw, exposed, but also free. He'd said what he needed to say, and the world hadn't ended. After the assembly, kids swarmed him, some thanking him, others just wanting to talk. A quiet sophomore named Sam approached, his voice barely audible. "I'm like you," he said. "And what you did, it made me feel like I could be okay." Elliot's throat tightened. "You are okay," he said. "You always were." That night, Maria cooked his favorite con pollo and they ate together, talking about everything and nothing. She didn't ask about Caleb or the assembly, but she didn't need to. Her pride was in her eyes, in the way she squeezed his hand. But Caleb wasn't done. Elliot knew it in his bones. The fallout from the assembly was immediate. By Monday, Elliot's presentation was the talk of Lincoln High. His sketches were shared online, his words quoted in group chats. He'd become a symbol, whether he wanted to or not. But with the spotlight came pressure. Some kids called him a hero. Others whispered he'd gone too far, humiliating Caleb in front of everyone. Caleb himself was quieter than ever, but his silence was a storm brewing. Elliot caught him staring in the halls, his eyes dark with something new, not just anger, but something deeper, more personal. It unnerved Elliot, but he refused to let it show. Mia, ever the strategist, had a new idea. "You've got their attention," she said during lunch, her purple hair catching the light. "Don't stop now. Start a club, a space for kids like us, like Sam. Somewhere safe." The idea hit Elliot hard. A safe space. He'd never had one. Not really. Until Mia and her friends. He nodded, the spark of purpose reigniting. "Let's do it." They called it the Prism Club, a place for anyone who felt like they didn't fit LGBTQ kids. Allies. Anyone who needed a community. They got permission from a sympathetic teacher, Ms. Harper, to use her classroom after school. The first meeting was small, just Elliot, Mia, Sam, and a few others, but it felt like a start. They talked, laughed, shared stories. Sam opened up about his fear of coming out to his parents. Another girl, Priya, spoke about feeling caught between her culture and her identity. Elliot listened, his heart full. But Caleb wasn't far behind. A few days after the first Prism Club meeting, flyers appeared around school, crude, mocking ones, mimicking Elliot's sketches but twisted with slurs and caricatures. They were unsigned, but everyone knew who was responsible. Elliot found one taped to his locker, his own face distorted into a cruel parody. His hands shook as he tore it down, but he didn't crumble. Instead, he took it to Ms. Harper, who reported it to the principal. Caleb was called in, but his dad's influence meant he got off with a warning. No suspension, no real consequences. The injustice burned, but Elliot didn't let it stop him. The Prism Club grew, meeting twice a week now, with more kids showing up each time. They planned events, a bake sale to raise funds, a mural project for the school. Elliot poured himself into it, his sketches becoming bolder, his voice stronger. Then came the second surprise. One afternoon, as the Prism Club was setting up for a meeting, a new face appeared at the door. It was Lucas, one of Caleb's friends, a tall kid with a quarterback's build and a nervous expression. "Can I join?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Elliot blinked, stunned. Lucas had been part of Caleb's posse, laughing at his taunts. But now, he looked small, vulnerable. "Sure," Elliot said, his voice cautious but kind. "Everyone's welcome." Lucas didn't say much that first meeting, but he kept coming back. Slowly, he opened up, admitting he was questioning his own identity, terrified of what Caleb would think. "He's my best friend," Lucas said one day, his voice breaking. "But he'd hate me if he knew." Elliot listened, his heart aching. He saw himself in Lucas, the fear, the longing to be seen. "You don't have to tell him," Elliot said. "But you don't have to hide who you are, either." The Prism Club became a refuge, not just for Elliot, but for a dozen others. But the flyers kept appearing, each one uglier than the last. Elliot knew Caleb was lashing out, his control slipping. And he knew it was only a matter of time before Caleb made his next move. That moment came at the school's spring fair, a sprawling event with games, food stalls, and a stage for performances. The Prism Club had a booth, selling rainbow-themed cookies and handing out flyers. Elliot was there, laughing with Sam and Priya, when Caleb approached, his face a mask of cold fury. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Caleb spat, his voice low so only Elliot could hear. "This little club of yours. It's a joke. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Elliot stood his ground, his heart pounding. "Go ahead and try," he said. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Caleb's eyes narrowed, and he walked away. But Elliot knew this wasn't over. The fair was about to become a battlefield. The spring fair was in full swing, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. The Prism Club's booth was a hit, their rainbow cookies selling out faster than expected. Elliot felt a flicker of pride as he watched Sam hand out flyers, his shy smile growing bolder. But Caleb's threat hung over him like a storm cloud. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd gathered around the main stage for the fair's closing performances. The Prism Club had signed up for a group act, a short spoken word piece written by Elliot, performed by the whole club. It was a risk, but they'd rehearsed for weeks, their voices blending into something powerful. Elliot stood backstage with Mia, Sam, Priya, And Lucas, their nerves electric. Lucas was the most anxious, his hands fidgeting. What if Caleb's right? He whispered. What if this is a mistake? Elliot put a hand on his shoulder. It's not a mistake, he said. It's who we are. The MC called their name, and the group stepped onto the stage. The crowd was huge, hundreds of people, from kids to grandparents. Elliot scanned the faces, spotting his mom near the front, her smile radiant. Then he saw Caleb, standing with his posse, his arms crossed, his eyes glinting with intent. The performance began, each member stepping forward to deliver their lines. Sam spoke of finding courage, Priya of embracing her heritage and her heart, Lucas of the fear of losing friends but choosing truth. Elliot went last, his voice carrying over the crowd, weaving their stories into a call for acceptance, for love. The crowd was with them, clapping, cheering. But then, midway through, a commotion broke out. Caleb and his friends pushed to the front, holding up signs, crude, hateful messages, echoes of the flyers. The words were ugly, meant to wound, meant to silence. The crowd gasped, some booing, others frozen. Elliot's voice faltered, but only for a moment. He looked at his friends, at their faces scared but defiant. He thought of his mom, of every kid who'd ever felt small. And he kept going. We see your hate, he said, his voice rising, addressing Caleb directly. But it doesn't define us. We define ourselves. The crowd roared, drowning out Caleb's signs. Mia grabbed Sam's hand. Sam grabbed Priya's, and Priya grabbed Lucas's. They stood together, their voices joining Elliot's, finishing the piece with a power that shook the stage. When they finished, the applause was deafening. People stood, cheering, some crying. Caleb's signs dropped, his face pale, his friends abandoning him in the crowd. For the first time, he looked alone. Backstage, the group collapsed into hugs, tears mixing with laughter. Lucas was shaking, but he was smiling. I did it, he whispered. I actually did it. Elliot nodded, his own eyes wet. We all did. After the fair, Maria found him, pulling him into a fierce hug. You're changing things, Mijo, she said. I see it. Everyone does. But as they packed up the booth, Elliot noticed Caleb lingering nearby, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Elliot saw something near regret, maybe, or doubt. Then Caleb turned and walked away. That night, Elliot sat on the fire escape, his sketchbook open. He drew the stage, the crowd, his friends' hands linked together. He drew Caleb, not as a villain, but as a boy lost in his own anger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. The Prism Club grew stronger, its meetings packed with new faces. Elliot became a leader, not just for himself, but for others. And slowly, the school began to change. The weeks after the spring fair felt like a new chapter. The Prism Club was no longer just a club, it was a movement. Kids from other schools reached out, wanting to start their own chapters. Local papers wrote about Elliot's performance, calling it a stand for inclusion. Even the principal, usually cautious, praised the club's impact at a staff meeting. Elliot carried the weight of it all with a quiet pride. He wasn't a hero, not really just a kid who'd found his voice. But that voice had sparked something bigger than he'd ever imagined. Caleb, meanwhile, faded into the background. He stopped taunting Elliot, stopped leading his posse. Rumors swirled that his dad was furious about the bad press, that Caleb was grounded for months. But Elliot didn't care about that. He cared about the change he saw in Lucas, who came out to his parents and joined the club openly. He cared about Sam, who smiled more now, and Priya, who was painting a mural for the school's entrance. One day, as Elliot was leaving a Prism Club meeting, Caleb appeared. No posse, no smirk, just him, looking tired, his hands in his pockets. "I need to talk to you," Caleb said, his voice low. Elliot tensed, ready for a fight, but Caleb's eyes were different, haunted. Almost. "Okay," Elliot said, nodding toward the empty hallway. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of months between them. Then Caleb spoke, his words halting. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Elliot blinked, caught off guard. He'd expected anger. Not this. "Why now?" he asked. Caleb looked away, his jaw tight. "Lucas told me he's gay. My best friend. And I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I kept you down, kept everyone down, it'd make sense. But it didn't." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. Elliot didn't know what to say. He'd hated Caleb for so long, but now, seeing him like this broken, human, it shifted something inside him. "I'm not saying it's okay," Elliot said finally. "What you did, it hurt a lot of people. But you can change. You can be better." Caleb nodded, his eyes on the floor. "I'm trying," he said. "I don't know how, but I'm trying." He walked away, and Elliot let him go. It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully, but it was a start. The school year ended with a Prism Club showcase, a celebration of art, music, and stories. Elliot performed a new poem, this one softer, about healing, about hope. His mom was there, cheering louder than anyone. Mia, Sam, Priya, Lucas, they were all there, their faces glowing with pride. As the crowd applauded, Elliot looked out at the sea of faces. He saw kids who'd once whispered about him, now clapping. He saw teachers who'd stayed silent, now nodding. And in the back, he saw Caleb, standing alone, clapping quietly. The room was loud, but for Elliot, it was silent in the best way, a silence that meant he'd been heard. He'd taken Caleb's hate and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. That night, he sat with his mom on their couch, a bowl of popcorn between them. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "you've made me believe in miracles again." Elliot smiled, his heart full. "You're the miracle, Ma," he said. She laughed, pulling him close. And for the first time in a long time, Elliot felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.